Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I was hoping that we could have a discussion about the looming carbon tax hike that the Prime Minister is planning for April 1st. You did a comprehensive study of the carbon tax, and but you not only looked at the direct cost, you looked at the total cost. On page 3 of the report, it says household net cost of the federal fuel charge, fiscal and economic impacts. I'm sure there's lots of Canadians that are following this very closely because they know how high prices are and they're afraid of how high they're going to jump April 1st. But can you just explain what that means, fiscal and economic impacts?
So the fiscal impact is the impact of paying the tax directly, for example, filling up the gas tank, gas to heat the home. The indirect costs, so for example, if you buy a service or goods, there's an energy component embedded, plus the GST that's applied to that tax. So that's the fiscal cost. The government sends a check or a rebate. So the fiscal impact is the difference between what you pay, indirect and direct, minus the rebate. And on that front, 80%, we estimate 80% of households get more than what they pay. When we also include the economic impacts, that's taking into account the fact that some sectors will be negatively affected by the carbon tax. For example, the transportation sector, the oil and gas sector is an obvious example. They'll be presumably negatively affected by a carbon tax that progressively increases. So when we take also that into account, we find that households will have lower employment in some sectors, lower investment income, and we find that it's the opposite. Once you take into account the fiscal and economic impact, the changes in the economic fabric of the country, that households are seeing a negative impact from the carbon tax when including both the amounts that they pay, but also the economic impact on households.
So in other words, the fiscal impacts are where the tax is applied directly. So when I see that on my fuel bill, when I fill up my car, if I see that on my heating bill, that's the direct cost. And the rebate was only built around capturing that cost. But what you're saying today is that all the other cascading effects of the carbon tax increase will have a cost to Canadians.
Yes, there's an adjustment in the economy that's expected to take place by reducing our use of fossil fuels, and that will have impacts certainly in the short term while the economy adjusts, and that increases costs, for example, of transportation companies, which presumably will have lower profits that they will redistribute less of to shareholders, for example.
And higher costs that get passed on to consumers.
To Canadians, yes.
So that's exactly a factor too in the economic cost too. It's the indirect kind of cascading effects as a trucker has to pay his share of the carbon tax. That has to be accounted for somewhere. So with either higher prices, as you say, either lower wages or lower profits back to shareholders. Okay. And with that in mind, the majority of Canadians are the majority of Canadians better off or worse off even after you factor in the rebate?
Well, once you factor in the rebate, but also the economic impacts, based on our modeling, the majority of households will see a negative impact as a result of the carbon tax.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you've broken down in this
when
chart
what
are called quintiles. But for those that might not be familiar with that word, that basically means you take incomes and you divide them into 5 groups from highest to lowest. Is that right?
So from the highest is quintile 1, and the highest, we can call them MPs, but we call them quintile 5. That's a joke.
And I'm looking at this chart, and even the third, the middle quintile, the third quintile, is a net loser in the province. I'm just looking at Alberta is even after you factor in the rebate, the net cost is in that middle quintile, that middle income earner, is $1,460 worse off. It's about little over $100 a month. Saskatchewan, my home province, $929 worse off even after the rebate. Manitoba, $1,000 worse off even after the rebate. Ontario, $1,200. Nova Scotia, $1,100 worse off even after the rebate. Prince Edward Island, $1,118. Newfoundland and Labrador, $680. In most of these cases, we're talking about an extra $100 a month in costs, even after the rebate. Am I reading that correctly?
These are averages, of course, and it varies across provinces depending on the exact or the particular economic conditions and industrial structure of each province and jurisdiction.
Okay.